Last night's episode of the Jimmy Kimmel Show began like any other. The studio audience buzzed with excitement as they prepared to welcome Robert Downey Jr. Fresh from his latest blockbuster success and riding a wave of critical acclaim that marked his remarkable career resurgence. What no one expected was that beneath the surface of Hollywood glamour, a perfect storm was forming, one that would reveal the darker side of late night entertainment. The trouble started even before the cameras rolled. Backstage sources reported an unusual tension in the air as Downey Jr. arrived for his scheduled appearance. Unlike his typically charming and relaxed pre-show demeanor, the actor appeared noticeably reserved, almost guarded. Makeup artists and production assistants whispered about the palpable unease that seemed to trail him through the studio corridors. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his sharp tongue and willingness to push boundaries with guests, had reportedly prepared what he believed to be his most provocative interview questions yet. Behind closed doors, was overheard boasting to producers about his plan to get under Downey's skin and deliver television that would get everyone talking. The host's reputation for ambush-style questioning and his tendency to favor controversy over genuine conversation had already made several A-list celebrities hesitant to appear on his show. As the familiar opening music played and Kimmel delivered his monologue with his trademark smirk, subtle signs suggested something was different about the night. His jokes felt sharper, more personal, and his demeanor carried an edge that even regular viewers couldn't ignore. The studio audience, initially responsive to his humor, began sensing an underlying tension that was poised to erupt. When it was time to introduce his guest, Kimmel's tone carried a clear undercurrent of something that felt less like excitement and more like anticipation for conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome someone who knows a thing or two about second chances and reinvention, he announced with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The words sounded innocent enough, but those familiar with his tactics recognized the setup for what it was becoming. Robert Downey Jr. stepped out from backstage with his signature confidence, waving to the enthusiastic crowd and flashing the charismatic smile that had won over millions of fans worldwide. But as he approached the guest chair and shook hands with Kimmel, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something important. The handshake lingered just a moment too long, with both men maintaining eye contact in a way that suggested this would not be the light-hearted celebrity chat audiences expected. The first few minutes unfolded normally enough, with standard questions about upcoming projects and casual banter about life in Hollywood. Downey Jr. displayed his usual wit and charm, deflecting questions with humor and engaging the audience with stories that drew laughter and applause. Kimmel's responses, however, felt forced, almost mechanical, as if he was simply going through the motions while waiting for his moment. Then came the shift that changed everything. Without warning, Kimmel leaned forward in his chair, his expression hardening and his voice adopting a tone that immediately put everyone on edge. "You know, Robert," he began, his words carefully measured and deliberate, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you for a while now, and I think our audience deserves to hear the truth." The studio fell silent as Downey Jr.'s smile faltered slightly, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert in an instant. The seasoned actor, who had weathered countless interviews and public appearances throughout his career, seemed to sense that whatever followed would test every ounce of his composure and professionalism. What came next would set the stage for a confrontation no one in that studio would ever forget. The question that shattered the veneer of polite, late-night television arrived without warning, delivered with Kimmel's trademark calculated cruelty, masked as curiosity. "Let's talk about your past, Robert, the real past. The arrests, the rehabilitation, the way you've carefully constructed this comeback narrative. Don't you think the public deserves to know how much of your redemption story is just good public relations?" The words lingered in the air like a toxic cloud, and the audience's collective intake of breath echoed throughout the studio. Downey Jr.'s face changed in a way that was both subtle and profound. The easy smile disappeared, replaced by a steely gaze that those who knew him recognized as a warning. His fingers, which had been casually tapping on the armrest, went completely still. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you asking me, Jimmy?" Downey Jr. asked. His voice remained steady, but there was a sharp edge to it that hadn't been there moments earlier. The seasoned actor, who had spent years learning how to navigate the dangerous terrain of public scrutiny, was clearly caught off guard by the host's aggressive turn during what was meant to be a promotional appearance. Kimmel, sensing weakness, pushed ahead with the persistence of a predator that believed it had found an opening. "I'm asking whether all this talk about personal growth and second chances is real, or if it's just another performance. After all, you're an actor. How do we know when Robert Downey Jr. is being genuine and when he's playing a role?" The studio audience, unsure how to respond, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What had begun as excitement for entertainment quickly became something far more unsettling: the voyeuristic spectacle of a public ambush. Some audience members exchanged uneasy glances, while others leaned forward, drawn in by the pull of the unfolding drama. Downey Jr. leaned back in his chair, straightening his posture as if making a deliberate choice about how to proceed. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who had faced far more formidable adversaries than a talk show host armed with a microphone and an agenda. "You know, Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my work projects that employ hundreds of people and bring joy to millions around the world. But it seems you're more interested in tabloid psychology than an actual conversation." The remark struck a nerve. Kimmel's mask of professional detachment began to crack, his laugh sounding forced and hollow as he waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, come on, Robert. This is what people want to hear about. Those glossy magazine interviews where everyone tosses you softball questions. That's not real journalism. That's not honest." "Honest," Downey Jr. echoed, raising his eyebrows in a way familiar to anyone who knew his performances to calm before the storm. "You want to talk about honesty? Let's talk about a host who built his career on cheap shots and gotcha moments instead of real talent or insight. Let's talk about someone who confuses cruelty with cleverness." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop as the exchange moved well beyond typical celebrity banter. Kimmel's face flushed red, a visible sign that his guest had hit harder than expected. His carefully maintained image as the cool, unflappable master of the room was beginning to unravel in real time. "That's rich," Kimmel shot back, his voice rising as his composure slipped. "Coming from someone who spent years making headlines for all the wrong reasons. At least I've been consistent. I didn't have to reinvent myself after a string of very public failures." The words landed, but instead of the defensive reaction Kimmel anticipated, Downey Jr. leaned forward, wearing a smile that was anything but warm. "Failures? Is that what we're calling personal struggles now? Jimmy, I made mistakes, owned them, learned from them, and built something meaningful out of the wreckage. What's your excuse for being the same petty, mean-spirited person you were when this show first started?" An eerie silence fell over the studio as the two men locked eyes across the interview desk. Any pretense of entertainment had vanished. Production assistants exchanged frantic looks from the wings, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation continue. The live audience realized they were witnessing something unprecedented: complete collapse of the traditional hostcast dynamic that defines talk show television. Kimmel's hands clenched into fists on the desk as he struggled to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. What he had expected to be an easy target for his brand of hostile humor had become a formidable opponent, matching him blow for blow. The host was clearly unprepared for a guest who refused to absorb the abuse with a smile for the cameras. The tension reached a breaking point as both men braced for what would become the most explosive exchange in late-night television history. What followed would be replayed across social media within minutes, analyzed by entertainment journalists for weeks. and permanently alter how celebrity interviews were conducted on live television. Kimmel, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment, made the fatal choice to push past the point of no return. "You know what, Robert? Since we're being so honest tonight, let's talk about how you've managed to convince everyone you're some kind of hero. Iron Man, please. You're just a guy who got lucky that Marvel decided to take a chance on damaged goods. Without that suit, you're just another Hollywood has-been with a substance abuse problem." The words slammed into the studio like a physical blow. The audience gasped audibly, several people covering their mouths in shock at the sheer viciousness of the attack. Even the camera operators, seasoned professionals who had witnessed their share of uncomfortable television tinged, stunned looks. This had crossed every line of professional conduct and basic human decency. Downey Jr. went completely still, the moment stretching into what felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, carrying a level of controlled rage far more dangerous than any shouting match. "Jimmy, I want to be sure I understand what you just said. You're suggesting that my work, my craft, my contribution to projects that have brought joy to millions of people around the world are somehow invalidated by personal struggles I've been open about and overcome." His calm response seemed to unsettle Kimmel even more than an outburst would have. Realizing he might have gone too far, but unable to retreat without losing face, the host doubled down with the desperation of someone who had wagered everything on a losing hand. "I'm saying Hollywood loves a good redemption story, even when it's manufactured. How many second chances do you get before people realize maybe the problem isn't Bad Luck Hit's character?" The studio audience was now openly uncomfortable, some shifting in their seats, others glancing toward the exits. The atmosphere had shifted from entertainment to something far darker, the spectacle of a public execution disguised as an interview. Production assistants gestured frantically to one another, clearly debating whether to step in or let the disaster continue. Downey Jr. stood slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. Simply rising from his chair made him appear taller, more imposing, and infinitely more dangerous than the man who had walked on stage minutes earlier. "You want to talk about character, Jimmy? Let's talk about character. Let's talk about a man who built his entire career on punching down and mocking people who were struggling, on turning human pain into punchlines for profit." "Huh?" His voice rose, not with the hysteria of losing control, but with the mounting force of someone finally releasing years of pent-up frustration toward this exact kind of treatment. "You sit behind this desk every night, making millions by ridiculing people facing real problems, real pain, real challenges, and you have the audacity to question my character." Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, tried to reclaim control with a laugh that came out more like a nervous cough. "Hey, look, this is getting a little too serious for late-night television. Maybe we should know, Jimmy." Downey Jr. cut in, his voice slicing through the attempted deflection. "You started this. You wanted honesty? You wanted to dig into my past, question my integrity, suggest that my work and my growth as a person are somehow fraudulent. So let's finish it." He began to pace slightly, controlled yet predatory, like a panther circling its prey. "You know the difference between you and me. I owned my mistakes, faced them, learned from them, and used them to become a better person. You've been making the same mistakes for years, hurting people for entertainment, and you've learned nothing. You just keep doubling down on cruelty because it's easier than developing real talent." The words landed with devastating precision, each syllable carefully chosen to dismantle the host's carefully crafted public image. Kimmel's face cycled through anger, embarrassment, something resembling recognition as his behavior was reflected back at him in the harshest light. "I've built my career on more than just," Kimmel began. But Downey Jr. wasn't finished. "You've built your career on cheap shots and manufactured controversy," he continued, his voice carrying the full weight of professional authority and personal conviction. You mistake meanness for wit, cruelty for insight, and you hide behind the excuse of comedy to justify behavior that would get you fired from any other profession. And now, when someone finally calls you out on it, you want to play the victim. The studio fell completely silent, broken only by the sound of Downey Jr.'s voice and the faint hum of the television equipment. The audience sat frozen, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history. Viewers at home were already reaching for their phones, capturing and sharing the scene as it unfolded in real time. Kimmel, his usual arsenal of sarcasm and dismissive humor exhausted, made one last desperate attempt to salvage both the moment and his wounded pride. What he said next would seal his fate and trigger the most dramatic exit in talk show history. Like a cornered animal, he made the choice that would define the lowest point of his career, rising from his chair to match Downey Jr.'s stance. His voice cracked with barely contained rage as he delivered what he believed would be his knockout blow. You know what, Robert? At least when I screw up, I don't blame it on addiction or mental health issues. Some of us take responsibility instead of hiding behind excuses and sob stories. The words lingered in the air like poison, and the reaction was immediate and devastating. The studio audience recoiled as if struck, several people gasping audibly while others covered their faces in horror. Even the seasoned production crew, veterans of countless uncomfortable moments, stood frozen in shock at the sheer cruelty of the statement. Downey Jr.'s response was swift and final. His expression shifted from controlled anger to something far more dangerous: complete disgust fused with cold fury born of a line that should never have been crossed. Without breaking eye contact, he reached up and removed his microphone with deliberate, measured movements. "Jimmy," he said quietly, his voice carrying a calm authority that forced everyone in the studio to lean forward. "What you just said tells everyone exactly who you are as a human being. You just mocked millions of people struggling with addiction and mental health issues, not for comedy, not for entertainment, but out of pure spite." The microphone came loose with a soft click that echoed through the silent studio. Downey Jr. held it for a moment, as if it symbolized everything wrong with the entertainment industry's approach to dignity and respect. Then, in a gesture replayed millions of times across social media, he gently placed it on Kimmel's desk. "I came here tonight as a professional courtesy to promote work that employs hundreds of people and brings joy to millions of fans. Instead, I was subjected to a public ambush by someone who mistakes cruelty for cleverness." His voice remained steady, every word carrying absolute conviction. "But your last comment wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on everyone who has ever struggled with addiction, depression, anxiety, or any other mental health challenge." Realizing the scale of his mistake, Kimmel tried to backpedal with the frantic desperation of someone watching their career collapse in real time. "Robert, wait, I didn't mean yes you did," Downey Jr. cut in, his words slicing through the attempted apology. "You meant every word, and that's the problem. This isn't a bad joke or a lapse in judgment. This is a pattern turning human suffering into entertainment." He moved toward the edge of the stage, his departure creating a vacuum of tension that drained the room. "You know what's truly tragic, Jimmy? You have a platform that reaches millions every night. You could use it to lift people up, to create something positive, to make the world better. Instead, you chose to tear people down for applause and ratings." With each step toward the exit, Downey Jr.'s words carried increasing weight and finality. "V spent years learning that real strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Real courage comes from facing your own demons, not mocking other people's struggles. And real talent comes from creating something meaningful, not destroying something beautiful." Studio audience, stunned into silence at first, began to respond with something unprecedented in talk show history: spontaneous applause for a guest walking out on his host. It started with a few scattered claps, then spread rapidly through the room as more people realized they were witnessing something historic. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of humiliation and growing panic as the full weight of the moment set in. His show, his reputation, his carefully constructed image as the king of late-night television were crumbling before his eyes, broadcast live to millions who were now seeing him exactly as he was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Downey Jr. said, turning to address the audience directly as he reached the exit, "you deserve better entertainment than watching someone's humanity dissected for cheap laughs. You deserve hosts who respect their guests, their audience, and themselves enough to create something worthy of your time and attention." With those final words, Robert Downey Jr. walked off the stage and out of the studio, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to echo through the television sets of millions of viewers. The camera lingered on Kimmel, motionless behind his desk, his face that of a man watching the destruction of everything he had built. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation went viral across every social media platform, with hashtags trending worldwide. The reaction was a mix of shock, overwhelming support for Downey Jr., and outrage at Kimmel's behavior. Entertainment journalists labeled it the most devastating takedown in television history. Mental health advocates praised the actor for his dignity in the face of such a vicious attack, while by morning the show's ratings had plunged to historic lows. Major sponsors began pulling their advertisements, and industry insiders openly questioned whether Kimmel's late-night career could survive such a public humiliation. The confrontation exposed something deeply troubling about the entertainment industry's treatment of human dignity, and audiences made it clear they wanted no part of it. Robert Downey Jr., meanwhile, received an outpouring of support from colleagues, fans, and advocacy groups who recognized his courage in standing up not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized or mocked for personal struggles. The incident became a turning point in how celebrity interviews were conducted, with networks implementing new guidelines centered on respect and dignity. What was meant to be a routine promotional appearance instead became a watershed moment, remembered as the night when one man's cruelty met another man's courage, and dignity triumphed over degradation in the most public way possible, all